Good evening, or afternoon, or morning, wherever you're at. This evening's Dharma talk is titled, Don't Second the Emotion. A little play on words there, but don't, whatever shows up in the mind stream, no comment, no agreeing, don't second it. Don't validate whatever shows up, which is going to show up as probably as you're somebody who feels this way, somebody who doesn't feel this way. It's that extra added commentary on top of whatever shows up that tends to personalize it and buys into, supports and reifies, substantiates, whatever you want to call it, the identity, which is unreal, but it gets its apparent reality from that kind of interaction, from grasping, rejecting, shutting down. So what we're talking about here is grasping. But you could say don't second the emotion by trying to get rid of it, trying to stop it. It shouldn't be there. It shouldn't be feeling this way. Even, why am I feeling this way? That you're actually seconding the emotion. You're validating it by you're saying, why do I feel that way? So you're building the initial duality, or you're buying into that, the illusion that there's separate things like me and the rest of the world, or me and my buildings, or my house, or my dog, ownership. So as I've heard me say so many times before, I'm kind of getting the same Dharma talk over and over again in some ways, but don't necessarily do that. And since I know you probably can't help that because I can't, but it's about being aware of that, not so much succeeding at doing what I'm suggesting that you do. Oh, I've finally stopped seconding my emotions, so now I'm liberated and I see that I'm not separate from anything. That's why it's called a practice. That's why we return with the intention over and over again to see what is fundamentally true ourselves. And when the emotions come up that are possibly triggered by something else, as no one's actually poured those emotions into you, but you may not have been feeling anything other than just enjoying the weather, enjoying this or that, and somebody does something, or something happens in your life. And suddenly that from the mundane, from just the ordinary situation, it might be just a circumstance that was nothing particularly special, but somehow that set you off. In other words, that triggered some area of your consciousness where something has not been examined so well. A couple of things. One of them is the emotion that's coming up itself, which is your karma. It's happening because it's dependently arisen, but also the lack of clarity around there not being any witness to that. There's a witnessing, but there's no identity. It's a mistaken identity. Not something you can stop or correct particularly. It's one that has to be seen. You have to see that what keeps showing up as me, and what I think, how I feel, where I'm going, what happened to me, that me feeling is unreal. It is a collection of ideas, opinions, guesswork, hope, and fear, and so on. There's lots of different ways of being that you can describe it. So what do we do with that? We don't take a relative approach and try to fix it, although some teachings do. The Teacher 7 Points of Mind Training has some slogans in there where you're trying to go in and actually stop something from happening, or control it, or manipulate it in some way. I'm not against that. May in some situations may even be for that, but it would be very situational how you would go about that, not just one size or one formula or one protocol or one standard fits all. As it says in the sutra, don't set up standards. What was that? Sokuzan mai? Anybody remember? Nobody remembers. Well, I don't feel so bad. Said one of those. Don't set up standards. And what is being said there, it's not that there aren't standards, that there might even be standards that you might need to set up in some way. but to set up standards to try to protect us from the open dimension with which everything, and in which everything is arising without reference points. It can be very uncomfortable for the ego mind that is looking for constant reification, validation, substantiation, and support to its apparent existence, apparent identity. Sometimes when emotions come up, they're so difficult because of not just the trigger itself, but the triggering happens in such a way that it hits an area, what would you call it, a sore spot, or an area that you've been able to hide out from or close down on. And this situation, the person may have intentionally insulted you or given you a hard time, or it may just be somewhat accidental, or it could be even situational. Just the situation as such had nothing to do with you, but something about the way it strikes you is suddenly it's all about you. It's all about being misunderstood or left out or mistreated. And it's not that relatively that hasn't happened to some extent. Perhaps it has, but also it might not be happening at all. It might just be the situation is what it is. And your projection, your imputation about it, your ideas and opinions and your perception of it, you take personally. And when we say, sometimes in just everyday situation, don't take it personal, but I hate your guts or something like that. It's not about not taking it personally so much as seeing that, witnessing that you're actually taking having a situation as somewhat just a situation, somewhat just generic, and some aspect of that seems personal, seems like it's about you. Not something you can particularly get rid of, because it is an illusion. It's unreal from the get-go, from the beginning. It's already unreal. So you don't have to get rid of it. But it is good to be aware of what is happening in the mind stream, whether it's passion, aggression, ignorance, advancing oneself, retreating, or shutting down. So don't second that, don't agree with it, don't go along with it. That shows up, one of the simple ways that shows up is if it's something you've been dealing with, something where you're working with, say, jealousy, or you're working with envy or something like that, that is triggered by the otherness of somebody has something or is doing something, and it triggers that. And my understanding of how to work with that is just receive that, as nasty as that may feel or smell or taste, just receive that. Don't go the other way, or don't take that and force yourself, some kind of torturing yourself into realization. But just if it's coming your way, just receive. Be generous with that attention. Just receive. Because when that happens, when something happens that it triggers that, that's actually seems to be an area that is already there. You could say it's kind of dormant in some way. We could also go into the 8 consciousness and have some descriptions of how that works with the 7th or the storehouse. And still, we would still be describing things that look like they're happening along with those particular conceptual references to the nature of consciousness, but not necessarily. So it is about being aware that there is a triggering, that there is an identification. And one of the ways this shows up as when you abandon what arises, when something arises and you, because of the texture of it, the feeling of it, the prickliness of that, the smelliness of that, the repulsiveness of that, and for something else, a very simple way this happens is you just say to yourself in your own mind, you might not say it out loud, there I go again. Being envious, there I go again. Rather than just being, allowing yourself, when I say yourself, allowing the consciousness to just be flooded with that sad, sickly feeling. This approach, it's not exactly humility, but it is the beginning of that. No longer at war with anything, no longer above anything, no longer a great, wonderful person that knows just a little bit better than your next door neighbor. Yes, sir.
Sokuzan, when the momentum to second the emotion is really strong, is there a way that we can just drop down right into the emotion itself?
You may be able to. There's a lot of, since everyone is dealing with different versions and combinations of karma, causes and conditions, there's no specific way to do this, although it's sometimes some of the slogans address when this happens, do this, or when this happens, do this. But I think it's just a matter of a lot of mind training. In other words, a lot of sitting. Have a way to return to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, which we have here. The very structure of this, if you live here, you're going to have to do that, at least in structure, if not in attitude, to some extent. More about that if you have it.
Sokuzan, what does it, in looking at an emotion like jealousy, what does it look like to just receive that rather than going into there I go again or something?
It just hurts. It just hurts. And even that is too much. Just hurts. Those words are extra. So I'm using that to talk to you about it. But if I'm to point at it, I'm just saying whatever shows up that you are abandoning to call jealousy, drop it. Drop the nomenclature and just be with the texture of the crap that we're calling jealousy. Just like you go into it before you have a name for it. And then sit there. When I say sit there, don't maintain it, but let it be that way, as it is, as it is. And that cannot be, one cannot practice in that way unless there's a lot of mind training, as far as I see. A lot of sitting still, watching what moves, and training yourself to stop grasping, stop projecting, and stop shutting down, and that takes mind training. So part of it also is when that does show up, if you see yourself moving into that, then don't reverse the whole thing and try to stop doing that. That's why it's so difficult. It's a very, very subtle area of consciousness that rotates back into a self over and over and over and validates, reifies, justifies, and gives life insurance to the self, the imaginary being. Go ahead.
Sokuzan, when it comes to unexamined emotions, can we only look at that as it's being triggered?
I'm not following what you're at.
Sokuzan, can we look at an unexamined emotion before the trigger?
I'm not saying it can't be done, but it's less likely. It's easier just to ignore it. Leave it in its hideout, leave it under a rock, leave it somewhere. But when the frequency of whatever the trigger is the same as what is being hidden, then it's coming out and it's going to claim its prize. It's going to claim the connection. It's going to do that. And to just observe that happening is the way that we work with dependent origination, to not shut down on it and to not interfere with it with passion or aggression. Just be that. I sometimes say, be the crap you're trying to get rid of. Doesn't mean maintain that, but when it comes up, don't object, don't agree, don't look away.
Sokuzan, how can we flood the triggered emotion with awareness when it seems like the emotion itself arises with a bunch of protective layers?
Just practice. You're seeing, you could not say that if you weren't aware of those layers. So just receive the layers, just receive the structure that is showing up as promotion, protection, or ongoing momentum that we're calling the emotion itself, that we're making it more real than it actually is, or giving it some kind of substance that needs to be dealt with. We have to stop this. I can't stay here anymore. I can't live with this person anymore. I can't talk to this person anymore. Yak. Constant mini skirmishes in the mind stream, trying to accomplish some kind of relative success or relative security. Materialism. It's going into the spiritual path with some kind of materialistic goals or orientation. Not wrong. We all do that. We all, especially when we start, we're trying to feel better, get better. This is terrible to feel sad or confused all the time. We look to meditation. Or
Sokuzan.
you and I can just do the whole damn thing. Just do your questions.
One more question.
I'm not trying to stop you. It's called humor. You're smiling, so that's good. Go ahead.
When we're working with difficult emotions, what is the difference between an awareness practice and improving?
Don't improve. The awareness practice is you don't have an agenda around improving. Not that there isn't something always lurking in the background saying, I think I'm doing a little better. This wasn't quite so bad as it was yesterday. Maybe I'm. What is that? It's like a willingness to be screwed up forever. That kind of situation is something that ego mind, the self-centered part of the consciousness, can't turn into some kind of currency. It can't get any value out of that other than to think, I'm the one who can be with all things. Kind of baloney. More? You follow what I was saying? Paraphrase it. Give it to me. What did I just say? Come on, let me have it. You listened to me. You asked the question. I responded. What did I say? Tell me.
A willingness to be simple-minded.
Simple-minded? You mean like a simpleton? Like a know-nothing person? That's close. It's not it, but it's close. Thank you. Please don't feel threatened. You're not feeling threatened.
Junchu bowing.
Yes.
You talk about how we validate the
Yes.
emotion. Earlier, you said to me, the emotion needs to be there.
Yes.
Is that a validation?
When I say it, it is. So what I'm getting at there is, if it's there, then it's there because of causes and conditions. And the causes and conditions we tend to personify and then separate and come to conclusions. This should and that shouldn't. And this is okay, but that doesn't work. And we tend to go anywhere, any direction we can to get some kind of feeling that we're know something, we're getting somewhere, or accomplishing something, or we understand something. So when I say it has to be there, it's dependently risen. Anything that occurs is what it is, and it's not separate. So it looks like a separate occurrence. It's like a separate occurrence, but it's dependent on everything. There's no past to this. There's no future to it, and there's not even a present. It is an illusion. If you don't see it, you'll continue to believe in this and that, or you'll believe in this and reject that. It's just a rotation of samsara, and it has most of us in its talons.
Junchu bowing. Hearing you say that the emotion needs to be there, feels helpful, but if I try and tell myself that, it feels like a validation.
Hear me saying it. You're my student. I'm your teacher. I'm doing my best. I can't interfere with your karma. If you said, screw this, I've had enough, I'm moving back to Vermont, or wherever the hell you came from. I know it wasn't Vermont. Nobody comes from Vermont, do they? Isn't that one of those states where it doesn't actually exist? Am I going to get a lot of email? Probably not. So, but you could use that. You can listen to that. If that is helpful to you, you can hear that. I hear my teacher's voice in my head, both of them, all the time. Especially, well, both of them. But since Coben never said much to me, it's easy for me to remember what he said.
Student, you bowing?
Yes.
Is noticing the intensity of an emotion some sort of validation for it?
Not exactly. If you're doing kind of a comparison to what you were feeling 10 minutes ago, what you're feeling now, that noticing the contrast. Contrast is very close. Might not be exactly that because you're abandoning this to see how it compares with that. So there's a little bit of separation and deviation from what was originally arising in the mind stream for some kind of comparison. But it's not as difficult. It doesn't make things as cloudy or difficult or lost as if you say something like, "Oh, there I go again. I'm never going to get this. This is just, I know this makes no sense for me to be envious, but I can't help it. I just get mumble, mumble, mumble. Don't reinforce anything. Don't have conversations with yourself about anything. But if you do, then just observe that. And eventually that, because you're not reinforcing it with anything, it eventually wears itself out. It takes time. Go ahead.
Student, you bowing? How can we notice the intensity of an emotion without using that to validate it?
If you do use that to validate it, just be aware of it. Nothing to repair. There's nothing to back out of. So if you notice there's some activity going on like that you tend to have a little bit of manipulation going on, or just be aware of it. Just awareness. The illusion or delusion cannot, in the open dimension of consciousness or awareness, it gets no oxygen there. It only gets oxygen through being pushed or pulled or shut down, some kind of movement within the space itself. More?
Yeah.
Any questions? Anyone online? Got one there? Go ahead.
A question from Terry Duperrin.
Terry?
Is receiving a form of compassion? Bowing.
Well, it may be. You're giving something your attention and it's coming towards you, so you're receiving it. So there may be something to that, but it's not a complete description of it. I don't know if there is a complete description other than not separate. Those practices are about trying to shake something up or do something or have some kind of a breakthrough in understanding. But the actual situation, compassion, there's no compassionator there. If there is, it's not compassion. It might be more like sympathy. I hear water is really good for you. I think it is. Other questions?
Isaac bowing.
Isaac, go ahead.
After I push on an emotion, is it genuine to recreate it? Can I go back and recreate it? Bowing.
Give me an example so I can get an idea of what you're referring to. Can you?
It seems like, just for instance, like anger, I can kind of push it away, add on, and it subsides. Then I could kind of try to remember it and it comes back. Not in its full force, but it still comes back. So is that
Compassion? No.
is that
What?
is that the original emotion?
The whole idea of original emotion is is just evidence that there's some kind of polarity going on, that I like this, I don't like that, or I caused this, but I didn't cause that. Who shot the sheriff? But it's like who's the culprit here? That search just ends up some kind of spinning. So why would you recreate the emotion? Is there some kind of something happening there where you want to do that? Not that you shouldn't.
Sometimes it's just like instinct, and then sometimes I try to do it. But no, I don't know why. That was helpful. Thank you.
Welcome. That was a good response to a why question. I don't know why. I like that. Further questions?
Jake Bowing.
Jake, go ahead.
Hi. You earlier said don't set up standards to try to protect us from the open dimension within which everything arises.
You wrote that down?
I did. It was catchy, so I think I was quick and I got it down. Can you give an example of setting up standards to protect us from the open dimension, Bowing?
Well, a little bit. It's just like we have a certain way. The extreme version is, I've always felt that way. Well, I always do it this way. Well, this is the way I was taught. Or any other, going to some kind of a standard for things. I'm not coming up with a really good example, but just setting up so you don't have to deal with the insecurity, you could say, of not knowing what to do or what to do next or how things are functioning. You have a willingness to open to, my way of saying it is to lead with your awareness. You're actually, you walk into a room and you with people and you don't have any kind of you might be there to join a group of people to discuss something. It might be for some kind of a celebration. It could be a party, but you don't necessarily come in with any kind of leading idea about how you're going to act, how you're going to. So don't set up standards for how you're going to function. That come in and just to use that, a little story there, just to use that, just come in and just be in the space and watch what moves your direction, watch what goes the other way. A kind of spontaneity that is not impulsive or compulsive of operating out of hope and fear, hope for that you'll look really good to people or be accepted, or people won't know that you have a mismatched clothing on. Those kinds of simple kind of ideas that sometimes tend to haunt us. There's not much happening, but we give ourselves a hard time over that. And so also to just receive what's happening, lead with the awareness, the openness of your mind, rather than out of the paranoia of making sure you figure everything out and how you're going to act. And if this person says that, or if they say this, I'm going to say this back. Have some kind of something all rehearsed, particularly. More about that, or am I missing what it is you're looking for?
No, that's helpful. If how do I become familiar with standards that are already set up, that I've already been living with? Bowing.
Well, they go from don't jaywalk to all the other things that we set standards we set up for ourselves that rather than protecting us, they might protect us relatively, but they actually prevent us, because whatever we do, we validate it. If it looks like it's a little sketchy what we're doing, we have other material that come in and we validate. Well, I need to do this because I need to function this way because. Difficult to live in an open dimension with a lot of agendas or a lot of the things that are set up to try to secure yourself so that you don't feel so insecure. Shoka
Bowing, along with what Jake is talking about or asking questions on, when an emotion arises and we second the emotion by saying, there we go again, what is that phrase filler covering up.
That there is no one, fundamentally, that there is no solid person who is, there might be that apparent activity or that going again, but there's no there, and there's no we there. That's the illusion, but that is recreated over and over to substantiate, reify, validate, and protect an imaginary self that operates out of paranoia. It might be a low-level paranoia, and that paranoia may be really covered up. That fear may be really covered up by a lot of aggression, or a lot of accusing others, or just having struggles in your family, in your relationship, blaming others for how you feel. But there we go again. It's untrue. It's a cover-up, which I think I talked about a few Dharma talks ago. Cover-ups, different kinds of them. More.
Shokubang, is the emotion that arises before we second it a fear of open space?
The emotion itself could be emotional, to not have a reference point, and to be seeing the nature of your mind is without a center and without a fringe. There's no reference point for anything. The path of the Buddha's Dharma leads to a vast openness, speaking about it relatively. It doesn't even include Buddhism. Buddhism is a path, it's like a raft. Once you use that story further, once you get to the other shore, you don't need the raft. You personally don't drag a raft around with you. But if you meet somebody who needs your help, you point to the raft and it appears. This is how it's done. The Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Train your mind. Yes.
Question from Ted Smith.
I thought sure it was going to be spool string.
Is there such a thing as a valid emotion?
All emotions are valid. Any emotion you have has a validity, and that validity of it is relatively is true. Well, it has a relative, this caused that. So it's relatively, but ultimately it's not. And if we go further into that, we say that it's both true and not true, which is further mind twister. How can only be something be true and not true? One of the examples I use for that is if you're watching a stage play, if you're watching a Stephen King movie, and it's both true in that it really feel it emotionally because you're watching it, you may want to just get away from that and go get some popcorn because you kind of know that it's untrue, but because the way a play or a story is set up, it actually triggers those emotional dynamics. But when those emotional dynamics deep in your consciousness, your alaya, however you want to say it, use whatever word you want, when those aspects are triggered, at the same time, you actually know in real time it's a play. But you don't know it so much that you can just sit there and watch some scary thing, the suspense build up when you know someone is about to get pounced on by a gorilla or something meaner than that, or more vicious. So that feeling is both real because it's happening in your mind stream, and it's unreal because it's unreal. Nothing's really happening there. It's a play, or it's a story. This happens in lots of different levels. It happens in poetry, it happens in literature, it happens in story, it happens at anything, time anything is something is created, but especially in the arts, it shows up. Something that transcends the very parts that make it up. Music is like this. It's what is it that putting several things together with sound in themselves, they're just parts, but you put them together in a certain way, and they evoke something completely beyond what you're hearing. If you went into astrology, which I'm not going to do here, but a little bit, one of the rulerships the planets in for music is Neptune. Neptune rules water, and it rules something that has no solidity to it particularly, and something that is slowly going out of the physical realm into consciousness, or into that netherworld that is beyond form, music. But also this can happen with a painting. It can happen with just a few lines of poetry can take you right out of this world. Go back and read Yeats, just to name one. He's a poet, but read the 13-year-old poet Arthur Rimbaud. Read A Season in Hell, or The Drunken Boat. Just read The Drunken Boat. Even the translation it's such a powerful set of images, but it transports us, just words that evoke the concept, but it transports us. It shows us the deep nature of consciousness that cannot be contained by just a body alone. So when this body goes, you're not going anywhere. If you do go somewhere, it might be quite interesting. And it will determine how this life has been going, how much passion, aggression, and ignorance has been ruling this life as to what occurs in that so-called future.
Yunshu bowing. When we believe our perception, or when it doesn't look like we've been triggered, how can we see a bigger picture?
Give me a little bit of an example. I'm following you, but a little bit of an example.
Like the example from earlier when I was triggered and felt left out, but I didn't see the whole picture.
Yeah, the trigger, what was happening to the emotion that you were happening was the bigger picture. But you're trying to get rid of it, or you're trying to blame. That's what we call, traditionally even called a dharma gate. The emotion that you were feeling, whatever, I can't really describe where you were going, but some kind of resentment or irritation, or why didn't this happen this way? Was it like close to it? Yeah, that's the dharma gate. We abandon the dharma gate for how it shouldn't be that way, or we abandon the dharma gate, that shouldn't be happening, or I've been slighted, me. But it's a dharma gate. Nothing is separate, nor is everything all glommed together in one big mess, like silly putty. It's just that. It's just what you were looking at was the reality that you've been looking for. But since you don't recognize it, you avoid it. Or not just you, but we all do. I do it. That's all I know about it. Have I stopped avoiding it? Oh. What is there that's different then?
Sokuzan, is any attribution to an emotion of being mine or not mine blame?
Paraphrase.
If an emotion arises and I say something like, this is mine, as a second, is that blame?
Blaming yourself? No, don't do anything with it. When I say it's yours, I don't mean it's like your fault. I mean, it's happening in your mind stream, in this particular construct we call a human being, with emotions, thoughts, memories. There's a containment of memories, and this helps us to create a whole situation we call our lifetime. But is there a past and a future? Find out. Find out so you see it. For me to say there's no such thing, or for anybody to say there's no such thing, you have to actually see it, that we do not go from 1 minute to the next. It's an illusion. And why is it? Because there isn't anyone. We're not saying it, we're not denying relative truth. It's just a misunderstanding of it. More?
Sure, I have another question.
Cool.
When we personalize a situation and make it about us, is there any way that we can, do we need to turn that around?
I don't know so much about turning it around to try to make it more successful or to try to stop a mistake or something like that. just if you just realize it, just see that that's what's happening. So that if you do anything with it, then if you try to do anything with it, fundamentally to get that to stop, we buy right into the whole circus, the whole Coney Island of the mind that just continues to feed off from otherness, correct and incorrect, any kind of other. It doesn't care if it's correct, doesn't care if it's right or wrong. It still will get fuel for self-centeredness from that. That's why it's so important to just receive it. At the same time you're receiving it, it might be some addition like, this is crazy for me to, this is not, I'm feeling this way, but no one's really done anything wrong. Nothing is really incorrect at all. It's just, I feel like it is. Or feeling feels. May not be an I there. More.
Sure, bowing. Is having a sense of humor with our emotions a way of seconding them? Bowing.
The way I'm understanding your question, I would say no. More.
Another question from Terry.
Mm-hmm.
Was my previous question about compassion adding to soften receiving? It seems like wanting or desiring a kinder approach to the less kind thoughts and feelings arising. Should we be more neutral?
No particular agenda about an outcome. Be more neutral, but just what you're already doing it correctly. Continue to return to the cushion. Continue to function in such a way that that kind of question arises. That tells me about you, Terry. I've known you for many years. Tells me that you're doing what you need to do. It's just a matter of continuing. If you want to use a relative idea, you're halfway up the mountain, or maybe you're further than that. But I can say that you're on the mountain. We use that as a metaphor for awakening, and it's just continue. And if you continue, then you go up. And then when you reach the top of the mountain, like wasn't it Kobun said that that's where the path begins, top of the mountain. The tantric Buddhism is as Buddhism without a guardrail. And then as I was told that Kobun said, I didn't hear him say this, that when he was asked about Zen Buddhism, that starts at the top of the mountain and goes up. So he was just trying to be a little cute there. He succeeded as far as I'm concerned.
A question from Spoolstring.
Spoolstring, you didn't let me down.
I feel like I have a number of personas that meander around. I don't seem to have that much control of them at times. Please elucidate.
You can't elucidate anything other than welcome to the club. Seeing the confusion can show up in all kinds of ways. There's all kinds of things that will seduce us. If you start to take that seriously, it can be difficult because you think there's something wrong with you. And what is the main problem? It's not that there isn't something wrong with you. Of course there is. It's just there's no you. There's no solid being. And if you begin to see this, it can show up as personalities. So this is why this is very difficult to do without a teacher, a teaching, and a community. I'm not saying you couldn't do it another way, but I don't know about it. Nicole.
Nicole Bowing, is there a way to be the emotion without letting it consume you?
Yeah, I'll let it consume you. You'll be back. Won't hurt. Might fall over. Just don't let the emotion consume you unless you have a lot of pillows on the floor. Silly statement, I know, but I mean that. I mean, say, allow things to come and go in your mind stream. Don't fight with anything. No more war. Lose the war, like it says. It doesn't say that in here anymore, but there used to be a banner that says lose the war. It doesn't mean be a pushover. It means that internal struggle that just seems to continually be, lose that. do it that way. And I don't, that, as far as I know, that can't be done with without a lot of mind training. It seems it takes a lot of work. Whether, no matter what your lineage is, if it's Zen or Tibetan Buddhism or Vipassana or any of the Buddhist the teachings that have come down through the centuries, all the different ways of manifesting the teachings that the Buddha taught for, what, 45 years? Further question? Anyone out there in TV land? Sure.
Sure, bowing. You brought up the mountain image. I think you said, I don't remember what you said, but my question is, if we don't second an emotion and we see that, or we're aware that we second the emotion but we're still seconding it, are those both steps up the mountain?
So when you asked me that question, I was thinking about this water. Ask me that again.
If we're aware of either not seconding the emotion or aware of seconding the emotion, are those both steps up the mountain?
Awareness is looking for royalty, for a king or a queen. That's the superior. It's just the awareness, just to receive. Awareness doesn't produce anything. Production may come out of the awareness, sometimes called skillful means, upaya. Or it may be unskillful. If it's coming out of awareness, it could show up any number of ways, depending on the karma that is also elbowing its way into the microbus.
Show bowing. If it's not about succeeding, whenever you say don't do something, what is it about those areas that you're pointing to, like don't add or don't second the emotion? What is it about those areas that helps us see who we are?
Thinking about water again. Can you remember? All right. I had you tag around with me to remind me of things. What?
If it's not about succeeding when you say don't do something, what is it about the areas that you're pointing to that help us train the mind?
The way it looks is there's more of an openness about what is moving in the mind stream. We're less concerned about whether it's a so-called rough and rugged thing or a soft and smooth feathery thing. You just notice there's a lot, the movement is coming and going. So you could say it in a, maybe a more descriptive way. There's just a less concern about outcomes and an interest, almost a curiosity, and a little bit of a sense of humor about what's moving in the mind stream, even when it's terrible, evil stuff or sickening stuff. Some interest in that. Am I meeting you where your question is surfacing?
I think so.
Okay. Anything else?
Shadow bowing. So, like with don't add or don't second the emotion, are those areas that we just take for granted or close down on? Bowing.
Looks like that.
Question from Lydia.
Yes.
When I observe an emotion as a physical feeling or experience, it tends to dissolve. But now I worry that it's a way of shutting down on what is arising.
The way I'm hearing the question, your worries is more of a ego strategy rather than, don't worry about it. Just continue. I don't see anything to address there other than to point out that the worrying part is the self-centeredness, worrying about failure. But what came before that sounds valid. Good question. Sir?
Sokuzan, going back to the image of the mountain.
Yes.
One time I asked you a question, what is mountain path? And you said everywhere you look is the mountain path.
Yes.
What is the mountain when everywhere we look is the mountain path?
It's a mountain path. Concept. There is no, use this as an image, because something you go up, you kind of get somewhere, have somewhere to go. Just an image. More? Is that unacceptable?
Sokuzan, I guess I don't really know how to ask what I.
Oh, I probably don't know how to answer. Both of them. Anyone out in, that I'm looking at on the Zoom screen that has a question?
Isan bowing.
Isan, go ahead.
I'm looking at a situation that came up tonight, and this is on email, a communication from someone that I respect who is suffering, so angry, lashing out, looking for someone to validate, to second that emotion and join in. I'm wondering how to respond, to not ignore that suffering without seconding the emotion.
Yeah. And so again, I don't think there's a standard way of protocol that, okay, this is how this is done, or some kind of standard. So, but and I mean, I don't really have to go into the detail of it, but you already know the details of what this person, he or she, was up to and what was going on and the way in which they were suffering. Just listen, just receive. And if they want your validation, then they will try to bring it out of you. What do you think? How do you think about that? And then you don't necessarily have to agree. You know, you can, if you understand that their confusion, a lot of their confusion, it looks like they're creating it themselves. You don't have to point that out. That's something they need to see. But you could come back and if they're trying to blame someone or something or some situation, you could say, I can see how you look that way to you. And if they say, well, don't you think so too? And say, well, I don't know, I'm not in the situation like you are. So you bring it back to them, bring it back to, you could bring it back to, without agreeing with them, you can bring it back to validating their experience, because they're the one who's going to have to deal with that. You can't do it for them. This is why parents keep trying to do things for their kids. They should mind their own business. Let their children be children. I mean, protect them, but trying to raise them right or something, it's just irritating. I know I've subjected to that myself. More about that, Isan?
Oh, that is helpful. I think it's just the difficulty is not getting wound up in other people's thought patterns of, you know, I know that this person feels excluded and left out, and they have reason to feel that way. Yeah. And yet being drawn in and validating what they're saying makes no sense. So I you know me, I want to help, but what you said was very helpful to meet them. Yeah,
if you're concerned about appearing as a helper to them, and that starts to get difficult then. But you can't necessarily buy into that. You know what I mean? We've talked about
I
this.
do. Mm-hmm. We have. Thank you.
Lots of people in the helping professions that are not saying they're not helpful, but a lot of their motivation for being there is to want to be somebody who is helpful. You get an identity of someone. Not incorrect. Those people didn't show up, we probably need a lot of help. Many people. So, but you could actually stay with them in their emotional dynamic about on being just receiving. Yeah, that sounds terrible. That sucks. That I can see where you would feel that way. So you could give them some listen to them. You don't have to function as their teacher or their mentor. And as I sometimes say, make them drag it out of you. Don't ever recommend anyone meditate. If they ask you about it, say, yes, I meditate. What do you think I should meditate? And you can say, I don't know. What do you think? You think you should meditate? They'll say, well, I don't want to meditate. And then say, don't. Well, don't meditate then. It's misunderstanding. Big one.
Thank you.
Certainly. Further questions? Johan.
Bowing. Can you still do something even though when you're aware of the 3 poisons? Bowing.
Well, yes, I think you can continue to do something even though you know logically this is ridiculous. This is ridiculous, and still there's this intense feeling or emotion about a particular thing, whatever it may be. Because sometimes those things are rooted so deep and they seem so valid and so real, even though when it's backed off, we think, why is that? That doesn't make no sense. I can see that there's really nothing to that. It's maybe not even about me. But then we go back into, that gets triggered again and we're right back at it again. And then we're scolding ourselves for doing that. All this does is reinforce the ego. It just creates a circularity. You'll be back over and over and over being upset because you can't figure it out. Logic doesn't apply there because the emotion is so intense, even though logically you shouldn't be feeling that emotion. Everybody recognize that a little bit, I'm sure. So what do I say about it? Just receive, just be the shit you're trying to get rid of. No, it won't last. If you stop fighting with it, it actually starts to come apart. Because it gets its sustenance, its energy from opposition, from warfare, from agreeing, which is an odd kind of warfare, but it is warfare. Agreeing something in order to agreeing with something in order to control it, seconding the emotion in order to feel like, well, at least, or shutting down, just distracting yourself either through activity, going in, joining a gun club or something, or playing cards, or if there's anything wrong with playing cards or anything. It's just that when we're using that to get away, or when we're using drugs to, the whole drug industry, a lot of it, I mean, not all, but quite a bit is based on getting a drug that can cover up symptoms. Not all of it, but some of it. Cover up. Go ahead, Yuhan.
Bowing. May I give you a quick example to see whether
Yes.
this is cover up? I was downstairs doing something to get my kids ready, and my husband helped Ellie with her word assessment, which will happen on Friday. I was not able to tolerate his loud sound with Ellie. Every time when he start like that, my thought is, here we'll go again. So I was not able, I was there for 2 or 3 minutes and I was not able to tolerate. I move up because I don't want to suffer.
Well, yeah, understand that. What's your husband's name?
Quay.
Quay. So what was Quay doing? That was just simple.
Oh, he has a very stressful job. He owns a dry cleaner.
I know he does. So what was the interaction that was bothersome to you, or?
All with my children's always. I feel like maybe I'm protected. I don't know.
And so
I just feel like, yeah, I have to cover it up and I move up.
Well, if you say I just have to cover it up, you're not exactly covering it up, because someone who covers things up doesn't know it. They don't really know they're doing that. And you're aware that there's some kind of cover up happening. Just be aware of that. You have to meet everything. There's nothing to correct with Ellie or with Quay. There's nothing to correct. They're independent human beings. They have their own life. So they may, Ellie's very young. What is Ellie, 6?
7.
7. Uh-oh. She's growing up. So they have their own, all you can do with children is just protect them so they don't get in trouble. you're not going to have a lot of say-so about this doesn't mean you don't educate them, maybe self-educate or but they need to be protected so they can be safe enough to see what direction they're going to go in their life. But as far as Quay, I don't know, he has a stressful job that could be showing up in that dynamic too. I think you're probably doing a lot better with all that than you perhaps you think. You might be giving yourself a rough time about it, because but none of that is your fault. You're not to blame for any of that. There's nothing to fix, but life is suffering. It's difficult. Further question, Johan?
No, thank you. Bowing.
I don't know where we're at. Any further? Yes.
Another question from Spool String.
Yes.
If there's no solid self, how does intuition remain?
Well, I'm going to use your words. Intuition didn't belong to anyone. There's no one who has intuition is self-existing. It has its own dynamic. It just shows up as a part of your consciousness or mine or anyone's. Consciousness does not have an owner, although it can be onerous. Sorry. Actually, not sorry. Not at all. Honorific. So, like, how does it show up? It's like saying, if who is it that realizes there's no identity? The realization is we're actually getting close to what Buddha nature actually is. There's no one who realizes anything. That's why it's sometimes said that nothing fundamentally happens. Where are we at as far as time?
9:17.
Yeah, we could maybe take one more question if there is one, then we'll close. And if there's not, we can also close.
Isaac Bowing.
Go ahead, Isaac.
Our thoughts, sorry, are my thoughts shared with other people? Bowing.
That's a good question. And I would say there's depending on the individual, on the situation, everyone has so much different chemistry, wiring, or however you want to, whatever metaphor you want to use to talk about the nature of consciousness, or the nature of my mind stream, or Chazon's mind stream, or your mind stream, and the way in which they are differentiate, and the way in which they're divided off and separated, and what kind of barriers are between us. But fundamentally, nothing is separate, but it is separated with the dependent origination, dependent on all the other things that are coming and going and so-called jockeying for space there. So I would say that fundamentally, no, but there are ways in which the consciousness is not, does not show up as being particularly guarded or protected. So I'm not sure if I'm getting close to what you're looking for. You're saying there's no guarantee, no guarantee. And some people are extremely sensitive to deeper layers of consciousness that they don't tell anybody about because they don't want to be locked up. And they don't want to be medicated, so they'll stop having visions of things that other people can't see. So the consciousness is finds its own form, and that form may not be one that you recognize. It may not be. It might be a form that you are terrified of. Not just you, but any of us. Important to train our minds to see clearly. You're welcome. Okay, we can close.
awareness penetrate into all places so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Jiho Sam Jihu Jisonu Samo Sa the 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajnaparamita.
O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sokokoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.